Hey, what's going on, everybody? Brent Hyden here, coming at you on this Wednesday morning, Wednesday before Thanksgiving. We have a monster 13-game slate on tap tonight. Before we jump into the slate, your quick reminder, please make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. That way you will get notified every single time I post a new breakdown video. Also, feel free to hit that thumbs up button if you like the content that I am producing. It goes a long way to populating my videos into search results. Also, feel free to share this with your friends if you are someone that happens to stumble across this video or this video was shared with you. Please make sure to hit that follow button over on the Twitter machine at BrentonHyden1 is my handle. It's in the description down below. While you're hitting that follow button, make sure that you send me a direct message. Find out how you can get access to my projections, my content, my Discord chat, and all that good stuff for a very affordable one-time price that carries you all the way through the playoffs. But without further ado, let's take a look at the slate. Our very first game of the night, we're going to talk about Indiana at Charlotte. Charlotte 3.5-point favorites, 217.5 over under. Victor Oladipo is questionable. Guillermo Hernan Gomez is questionable. Miles Turner is questionable for this game, and Michael Kidd-Gilchrist is ruled out. Perhaps the hottest player in basketball right now is Kemba Walker. He's totaled 103 points over his last two games. 60 of those came against Philly in overtime. 43 came against Boston. He's shooting really well recently, 35 of 59 from the floor, 13 of 27 beyond the arc, has a 39.3% usage rate over the last couple games. Draws a pretty tough matchup against the Pacers. They do rank 7th in defensive efficiency against point guards, but he's pretty much matchup proof. The one saving grace he does have in this game, Indiana is allowing 0.94 points per possession to the pick and roll ball handler. 47.4 of his possessions come in the pick and roll. Love him in tournaments. He's better priced over on FanDuel at $9,300 compared to $9,800 on DraftKings. Doesn't project extremely well, but still someone we know he has a monster tournament ceiling, so I'm fine with him in tournaments. If you're looking in cash, I think there's better ways to go. We have 13 games on the slate. Plenty of other solid point guard options to look at. Two guys actually that I do have a significant amount of interest in this spot are going to be Nicholas Batum and Jeremy Lamb. Taking a quick look into my projection model for you guys to see, Jeremy Lamb comes in at 5,400 on DraftKings, 6,300 over on FanDuel. Not a great price over on FanDuel. I'm still okay with it in cash, but over on DraftKings, it's really hard to get away from Jeremy Lamb at that $5,400 price tag. As you can see, it projects to be a pretty solid value, 5.3x value on DraftKings, only 4.57 on FanDuel, and this new player rating system that I have come up with that I'm trying to test before I implement it completely into the projections has him as a fairly decent rating in this spot. The same goes with Nick Batum, 4,800 over on DraftKings, 5,600 on FanDuel. More of a DraftKings play in this spot. Projects right about the same as Jeremy Lamb. Gonna have probably a little bit lower ownership, but comes in as a better point per dollar value, and then judging by his rating as well, a little bit better value there. Peeping those guys' game logs real quick. If you do take a look, Jeremy Lamb obviously has the more impressive game log coming off of a 25-point outing against Boston. Looked really good. The double-digit field goal attempts over the last few games, really appealing. Has been fairly efficient. Obviously getting a few extra minutes, getting a few extra shots with Michael Kidd-Gilchrist out of the lineup. But again, don't overlook Nick Batum. Going to be lower owned in the spot coming off mediocre games, but in cash at 4,800, if he gives you, this 24 or this 22, like, I'm not hating it. He's probably going to shoot a little bit better than 30% most games, and he does actually get a little bit of a boost in the spot. Pulling up my notes, opponents are shooting 43.3% on corner threes against the Pacers this season, and 15% of Batum's shots are corner threes, so someone that I like a little bit here. Marvin Williams is fine in tournaments, a little bit better price on DraftKings than FanDuel. Not someone that I'm ever terribly excited about, but at 3,800, he does kind of fit the value mold on DraftKings. And then Cody Zeller, a guy that's grades out fairly well in my projections. $1,100 price difference between FanDuel and DraftKings. On FanDuel, not a very good option. On DraftKings at 4,100, he's just a guy where you feel really comfortable in cash games that he's going to get you a solid return on his salary. I mean, 24, 26, 21, 28, 23, a couple down games, 21, 22, 21. Like, he's just going to get you 20 plus fantasy points almost every single night. And in cash games, I am perfectly fine with that. So, Cody Zeller, someone that I think you can use as a cash game punt in this spot. Looking at the other side of this game, Charlotte ranks 27th in defensive efficiency to shooting guards. They're giving up 25.3 points, 5.5 rebounds, 5.2 assists, 1.5 steals, 46.8% field goal shooting, and 36.3% from three. All of those numbers are important here because, well, that makes someone like Victor Oladipo very appealing here if he plays in this game. Unfortunately, we're not sure if he's going to play. Is listed as questionable in this one, so that's something that we definitely need to keep an eye on. If he suits up, he is someone that I do have a decent amount of interest in tournaments. Probably not going to go there in cash, but over on FanDuel at 8,900, that's a pretty appealing price tag. Grades out really well in my model. Taking a quick look over there, you can see about 43 fantasy points on both sites. I am pretty happy with that at his price tag in cash games. Again, grades out pretty well over on FanDuel. The rest of this game, Tyreke Evans is definitely in play if Victor Oladipo sits. Unfortunately, his price is way up, $5,400 on DraftKings, $5,800 over on FanDuel. Not terribly appealing unless Victor Oladipo is out. Miles Turner is fine. It's really tough to trust him, but he has been playing a little bit better recently. Popping back over to DraftKings, we can take a look at it. 5,300, that's pretty appealing for a guy that has 30 plus fantasy points in 3 straight games. Again, he's listed as questionable for this game. If he's not able to go, our boy Domantas Sabonis, who's coming off another monster game, really, he's just super efficient in his minutes that he's on the floor. The assist rate over the last couple games is really, really appealing. I like Sabonis in tournaments on both sites, especially over on FanDuel where he's power forward eligible. Again, not someone that's going to ever project particularly well because his minutes are really, really unstable. But this is a pretty good spot for him. So I like Domantas Sabonis a decent amount in this spot, especially in tournaments. And if we do get news that Miles Turner is sitting, he would be one of my favorite options on the slate. That would also open up minutes for like Kylo Quinn. Outside of the rest of these guys, Darren Collison's fine in cash, 5,200 on both sites. Never jumps off the page, but he's perfectly fine. Bojan Bogdanovic is an interesting tournament punt. Never a guy that you feel really excited about rostering, but 15% of his field goal attempts this season are corner threes. Opponents are shooting 45.3% against Charlotte on corner threes. Has some big games, has a lot of down games, which is why he's tournaments only, but has been shooting pretty well recently, especially over his last 4 games. 59% from the floor, 61% from 3. So Bogdanovic, someone that you can consider. Thaddeus Young, someone you can look at as well. Posting up a decent amount. 27.9% of his possessions are post-ups. Charlotte allowing 1.03 points per possession on post-ups. Again, just a better cash game option. Not really someone I want to look at on FanDuel, 4,900. Kojo is perfectly fine as a value option. But that does it there. Moving on to the next game, we're going to look at New Orleans at Philly. Monster total in this game. 234 over under. I actually think it has creeped up to, let me pull this up. 237 is what it has creeped up to. So monster total there. Elfrid Payton pretty much the only injury news in this one. This is going to be a pretty popular game. It's only a 3.5 point spread for Philly at home. Looking at the New Orleans side of things, obviously Anthony Davis averaging 37.3 points per game over his last 3 games. The Pelicans themselves are averaging 131.3 over those games. It's a lot of points. 41% of his shots come in the mid-range. Opponents are shooting 43.3% against Philly in the mid-range. I love Anthony Davis in pretty much all formats if you can afford him. There's a lot of studs on the slate. There's a whole lot of studs on the slate, and it's very, very difficult to get them all. Unfortunately, it is not Pokemon. We can't catch them all. But this is a really, really good spot for him. So if you can afford him and you want to get him in your lineups, feel free. I'm never going to call anybody a must play as far as especially studs go. But at 11-4 on DraftKings, 12-2 on FanDuel, he's perfectly fine, and in pretty much all formats has been really, really solid recently. You feel pretty comfortable that he's going to get you 50-plus fantasy points with 60-plus upside, as we've seen fairly regularly. I think my favorite way to get exposure to this game is going to be Nikola Mirotic. Philly ranks 30th in defensive efficiency to power forwards. You're giving up 24.3 points, 13.8 rebounds, 3.8 assists, 49.3% field goal shooting. 18.5% of Mirotic's possessions come on spot-ups. Philly's allowing 1.23 points per possession on spot-ups. Mirotic at 6,900. Very, very, very good price. Obviously coming off a somewhat down game against San Antonio. This is just a really, really good spot for him. I'm going to have a decent amount of exposure to Mirotic. Popping over to my model, here we can see Mirotic projects to be a really solid value on DraftKings at 6,900. Not as great on FanDuel at 7,600. I still really like him though. Projects for about 5.4x value over on DraftKings. Really, really solid rating here at 20.13 for Mirotic. The rest of this New Orleans side of things, I feel like I have to say it every single slate. Jrue Holiday, 8,100 on DraftKings, much better value. 8,800 on FanDuel, still really solid value. More of a cash game option for me. Same thing goes almost every single slate. Jrue Holiday is going to get you 40-plus fantasy points. If you want to lock that in cash games, feel free. Would not say no to him. Etuan Moore has been just absolutely crushing recently. Projects to be a fairly solid cash game value. I have a hard time trusting him for cash, but if you wanted to use him in cash as a cheaper way to get exposure to this game, Etuan Moore, over his last 6 games, 62% shooting, 52% from 3. That's insane numbers. Etuan Moore has just been ridiculous recently, averaging 20.13 points. He's fine, and like I said, I feel more comfortable with him in tournaments, but at 5K, I mean, he's probably not going to kill you. Going to play a decent amount of minutes. So if you throw him in your cash lineup, obviously that's fine. Randall in tournaments, unfortunately, he's a big boost for them off the bench. He's really expensive, 7K, 7,500 on FanDuel. Had a triple-double in his last game in just 25 minutes, taking a lot of shots, being a freaking wrecking ball in limited minutes whenever he sees the floor. So he's fine there. I don't really want to go with any of the Wesley Johnsons. I guess Wes Johnson's someone you can look at on like FanDuel as a punt option to get exposure to this game. Flipping over to the Philly side, Embiid's played one game against Anthony Davis, posted 51 DraftKings points in 24 minutes. That's a lot of fantasy points in a very, very short amount of time. Obviously, we know Joel Embiid's going to play more than 24 minutes tonight, assuming he doesn't get hurt or this game doesn't just completely blow out. Joel Embiid projects to be an extremely, extremely good value in this spot. Peeping over to the projection model once again, Joel Embiid 10-8 on DraftKings, 11-2 on FanDuel. Obviously, a little bit better price over on DraftKings. Projects for mid-50s in fantasy points. That's a really solid value. Gives him a really solid rating on this slate. I do like Joel Embiid pretty much all formats here. Cash, tournaments, whatever. If you can fit him in, feel free. New Orleans is giving up 50.8 points in the paint per game. Joel Embiid ranks 8th in the NBA in points in the paint per game at 11.9, posting up 30.9% of the time. New Orleans allowing 1.05 points per possession on post-ups. He's fine in all formats. I think Jimmy Butler is the interesting name, especially on DraftKings at 7,100. Over on FanDuel at 84, I don't have as much interest. He projects extremely well in this spot. Part of that comes from his transition game. He's averaging 6.5 or 6 points per game, 25% frequency in transition, ranks as like 89th percentile player in transition. New Orleans allowing 1.2 points per possession in transition this season. I have a decent amount of interest in Jimmy Butler, and I'm pulling up New Orleans defensive efficiency to small forwards right now. I say small forward, but he plays a lot of other positions too. But New Orleans 21st in defensive efficiency against small forwards, so that's pretty appealing for Jimmy Butler, especially on DraftKings at just 7,100. Sorry about the pauses for some rehydration. Lots of talking going on, but Ben Simmons in tournaments again. I'm always fine with rolling him out. Has triple-double upside. Has had a near triple-double 2 nights ago, and then almost near triple-double against Phoenix. Been playing really well, even with Jimmy Butler in the lineup. His touches are really solid. He's touching the ball a decent amount. I think his touches, prior to last game, I pulled it up, his touches had actually increased over the first 2 compared to his season average. So that's really appealing here. I like him better on DraftKings at 8,600. He's 9,700 on FanDuel. Not as appealing, but again, in tournaments, that's perfectly fine, especially if you're wanting to get a lot of exposure to this game. JJ Redick continues to be an excellent play in all formats, getting a ton of open shots, and that's really appealing here. Solid game against Phoenix. Played a few less minutes, had to go to the locker room like twice because he got busted in the nose on a screen, but 30-plus fantasy points in 2 of the last 4. Taking a lot of shots, shooting really efficiently, 56% from the floor, 42.9% from 3, compared to his season averages of 36.6 and 44%. I like JJ Redick pretty much all formats. He's similarly priced on FanDuel at 5,500. Grades out to be a really solid play in this spot, so I have a lot of interest in JJ Redick. Wilson Chandler does kind of jump off the page as a solid value. We saw his minutes go up a little bit last game, and up to 30. Did not play very well. Shot 1 of 4. He's just not a guy that's going to get you a ton of offensive production. Unfortunately, he's going to have to rely on the rebounds, the assists, some of the hustle stats and things like that, and then you're hoping he can get you like 10 real points with, a handful of rebounds and things like that. Obviously, a better value play on FanDuel at 3,800 where you can drop his score, but does project to be a really solid value in this spot. So, again, someone that you can get exposure to here. Probably not looking at Mike Muscala. I'm going to jump off that train as his minutes are starting to trend downwards. But, again, in tournaments, if you wanted to roll him out, feel free. Moving on to... Let's see, what is our next game of the night? We have Toronto at Atlanta. Lots to talk about in this one. Toronto 7-point favorites, 224.5 over under. That's pretty appealing in this spot. Kawhi Leonard, not likely to play as this is a back-to-back. Looking at the rest of Toronto, we do have OG Anunoby, who is questionable for this game. CJ Miles is questionable, but closer to probable for this game. Lowry, maybe questionable. We do have Norman Powell out. Omari Spellman is doubtful. Alex Poitras is doubtful, but Kyle Lowry, obviously in a fantastic spot, assuming Kawhi Leonard indeed is out here. Kyle Lowry without Kawhi Leonard, 25.9% usage rate, 1.48 fantasy points per minute without Leonard on the floor. Taking a look at my projection model, I actually have Kawhi Leonard projected out, which gives Kyle Lowry that boost, and he projects to be a pretty solid option here. Atlanta really bad on defense across the board. Just about everyone's in play here. Serge Ibaka, 30.2% usage rate, 1.47 fantasy points per minute, stands out to be a fantastic play as well. Unfortunately, the minutes tend to be a little bit lower for Serge Ibaka than I would like, because they do split a lot with Jonas Valanciunas. Taking a look, 30, 23, 34, 27, 26, 28. I think he sees right around 28, 30 minutes. I think I have him projected for 28. I'm fine with him in all formats. This is obviously an excellent spot for him. Pascal Siakam will get a few extra minutes because Kawhi Leonard is out. Really, 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 really good spots for Pascal Siakam as well. He actually projects to be a little bit better play than Serge Ibaka, at least on DraftKings. FanDuel, he projects to be a really solid value as well. He's just a little bit more expensive at $7,500. I'm fine with all three of those options: Lowry, Ibaka, Siakam. I don't know that I would stack them unless you're going to hope that this game stays close and you want to get some Toronto exposure or Atlanta exposure as well. But one or two of those guys is perfectly fine in pretty much all formats. If OG misses, that's another boost to Siakam, so that's something to keep an eye on. Fred VanVleet, DeLon Wright would be guys that would come into consideration if CJ Miles were to miss or Kyle Lowry were to miss. Right now, neither one of those guys projects like super well. DeLon Wright comes in right around 20 fantasy points because I am projecting, obviously, Kawhi Leonard to be out. That gives him a little bit of boost. Same for Fred VanVleet. You could roll him out in tournaments right now. I would like to see some of these other guys out, but you can roll them out in tournaments right now. And if something changes, I will obviously post in Discord. Danny Green's very interesting in tournaments. Generally does struggle with Kawhi Leonard out of the lineup, but Atlanta's allowing shooting guards to score a lot. So they're giving up 46.1 points per game, fantasy points per game, to shooting guards on the season. They're allowing 40.8% on above the break threes. 46% of Danny Green's shots come as above the break threes. Danny Green at 4,600 on DraftKings, very appealing. 4,800 on FanDuel, very appealing in tournaments. And that pretty much does it for the Toronto side. Atlanta, I don't have a lot of interest in Atlanta here. No one jumps off the page as like a very good option here. Pulling up my projection model right now to see if anybody even really looks at appealing. Not really. Alex Lynn projects to be a decent value over on FanDuel at 4,400, but that's not really that appealing. Trae Young, coming off a monster game, did look really good in that last outing against the Clippers. Trae Young in tournaments is fine. 17 assists, 25 points. Finally got the shot to fall a little bit. A lot of that also came from him, getting 8 free throw attempts. Took 22 shots, only hit 8 of them. He's still not shooting very great. Free throw attempts were a boost for him. Toronto giving up 1.2 points per possession in transition. That's a pretty big boost for Taurean Prince. 25% of his possessions come in transition. Young, 24% of his possessions. Jeremy Lin, 24% of his possessions. Kent Bazemore, 23% of his possessions. They're all interesting tournament options, and if you're stacking 2 or 3 Toronto players, maybe getting some exposure to like a Bazemore or a Prince would be a pretty solid option here. They're pretty short-handed, which is going to give some minutes to DeAndre Bembry, some minutes to Vince Carter, but they also have Justin Anderson who's back. They have Dwayne Dedman, John Collins. John Collins in tournaments at 4,800 and 5,100 over on FanDuel is a fine tournament option. But yeah, Vince Carter, revenge game, and he's like 13 points shy of 25,000. So there's your narrative streets play if you're really looking there again. Atlanta's always just going to be a tournament team for the most part, night in and night out. So moving on, we have Knicks at Boston. Boston 14-point favorites, 214 and a half or 216 and a half over under here. Yeah. Knicks are probably going to get smashed in this spot, but there's some interesting plays from the Boston side of this game, guys, that I do have a decent amount of interest in, and that starts with my boy Kyrie Irving. I've been on the Kyrie Irving train ever since he shaved and cut his hair. And he's been going absolute bananas recently. 25.6 points, 4.6 rebounds, 7.2 assists, 33% from three, 53.5% from the floor. That is over his last 5 games. Knicks have fallen to 15th in defensive efficiency, 2 point guards. That was actually prior to last night's game. So let me see what it is now, because Damian Lillard absolutely torched him. Go figure. They stayed at 15th, so didn't jump there. I love him in all formats, cash, tournaments. This is a really, 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 really good spot for him. I feel pretty comfortable that he's going to get me 40-plus fantasy points with monster upside, so I'm perfectly fine with that in cash and tournaments. The Knicks are allowing 64.5% shooting at the rim and 38% on above the break threes. 29% of his shots come at the rim, 27% of his shots on above the break threes. I love him in all formats. Going to be a guy that might be borderline a core option for me tonight. Al Horford dealing with a little bit of knee soreness. He's probable for this game. 29.1% of his possessions come as the roll man in the pick and roll. The Knicks really struggling to defend the pick and roll, 1.38 points per possession allowed. I like him in cash. I like him in tournaments. 5,900 over on DraftKings, really, really appealing. 66 on FanDuel, I'm probably going to pass, especially at center position. I like him more on FanDuel or DraftKings, where you can lock him into 4 different places. Brown is intriguing in tournaments, has not been playing very well, but a lot of his possessions come in transition. 33% of his possessions come in transition. Knicks really struggle to defend in transition. Very solid tournament option, but he's just been so bad this season. It's really hard to trust him. Tatum, monster tournament upside here. We saw him torch this team last time out. I have a decent amount of interest in Jason Tatum at 6,200 on DraftKings. That's really, really cheap. 6,900, while it's a nice price, not as appealing on FanDuel. Projects to be a pretty solid value, though. I have a lot of interest in Jason Tatum as a way to get exposure here. The rest of his team, Morris and Gordon Hayward, are fine mid-range cash options, but yeah, that's just about all for them. On the Knicks side of things, Fizdale's gonna Fizdale, and that really concerns me because he just rolls out a ton of bodies. Played 10 players last night. That's really, really, really disgusting. Let me see if Popcorn Machine has that game up yet, so I can see minutes totals for everybody. They do not, and ESPN is not something that I want to pull up right now, because that's going to play some video and mess up my sound. But let's pull this up. Let's pull up the game log. So the Knicks last night, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10 players. Burke played 25, Ntilikina played 27, Moutier played 24, Hardaway played 36, Cantor 26, Noah Vonleh 36, revenge game, Mario Hezonja 17. In this spot, I will say that Cantor and Vonleh, both very, very interesting options here, especially Enes Kanter, 6,200 on DraftKings, 6,500 on FanDuel. I would be willing to go back to the well on Cantor in the spot. Obviously did let us down a little bit last game. Assist numbers were really solid. Rebounding wasn't really there for him, and that's something that I don't anticipate to be an issue every single night. Obviously torched this Boston team last time out. Boston, a team that we like to target with guys that can rebound, because Boston giving up 47.4 rebounds per game. I like Enes Kanter a significant amount. Going to be a guy that I'm going to have a lot of exposure to if he's back in the starting lineup. Same with Noah Vonleh. I'm fine with taking both of them and hoping that they don't eat into each other too terribly much. But at 4,100, Noah Vonleh, very appealing in the spot. Burke is fine. Had another solid game last game. Not monster upside, but he's getting consistent minutes, and he's shooting a lot, and he's moving the ball pretty well. Torched this Boston team last time out, 31 fantasy points. against them. Boston a little bit struggling a little bit in the paint, 41.5% field goal shooting in the paint, and Trey Burke, a guy, 28% of his shots come in the paint. So Trey Burke, a guy I don't necessarily hate in tournaments, might be cash game viable. But that's getting risky. You're trusting Fizdale a little bit too high there. Tim Hardaway Jr., another really solid game last time out. Scored 32 points against the Trailblazers, has scored at least 30 points in each of the past 3 games, 12 of 28 from three-point range, 26 of 29 from the free throw line during that stretch. Still pretty fairly priced across the industry, 7,300 on DraftKings, 7,500 on FanDuel. Doesn't project to be a great value, but we do know Boston does really struggle against high usage volume scorers, and that's basically all Tim Hardaway Jr. is. So I'm fine with him in tournaments. Not really looking anywhere else. Let me take a look at Moutier. I guess Moutier is fine. Doesn't jump off the page, but he's fine in tournaments as a pivot if you think that Trey Burke is going to be super chalky. Moving on. Oh, buddy. Lakers at Cleveland. LeBron returning to Cleveland. LeBron's probably going to be the highest owned player on the slate. In this game, obviously, Rondo is out, George Hill is out, Sam Dekker is out, Kevin Love is out, J.R. Smith not with the team because he wants out, and they're trying to trade him, but he's not going to be with the team. And Colin Sexton is questionable for this game. Lots of injuries. LeBron James has been pretty solid recently. 51 points in his return to Miami. Maybe a little foreshadowing for his return to Cleveland. Yeah, I don't know about that, but, people are going to try to attribute, like, the revenge narrative here. It's not really revenge whenever he left. I don't know, maybe he has a soft spot and tries to take it easy on this team. I have no idea, but I do like LeBron James pretty much all formats here tonight. Pulling him up in my projection model. Projects to be one of the top stars on the night, obviously. I have him projected right around 50 fantasy points with a DK rating of about 21.92. For reference, guys like Russell Westbrook, Anthony Davis, James Harden, Joel Embiid, all in the high 20s and low 30s. So doesn't project to be like a fantastic option, but again, it's LeBron. It's him returning to Cleveland. If you want to consider that narrative, you can. The rest of this team, though, I do have some interest in Brandon Ingram. He's been doing a lot of ball handling duties with Rondo being out and Lonzo being absolutely atrocious. He's averaging 50.5 touches per game. That's third on the team. Double-digit field goal attempts in 3 straight. Can get you some rebounding and assist numbers. I like him in cash at 5,900 on DraftKings. He's 6,300 on FanDuel. Not as appealing, but does grade out to be a decent mid-range option. I'm fine with him in cash. I like him a little bit in tournaments as well. Kuzma has been absolutely atrocious recently. Fine in GPPs. Power forward eligible on both sites, DraftKings and FanDuel. 5,200 on DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel. More of a tournament option, but this is a spot where he can easily get on top of that salary. I think Lonzo in tournaments is perfectly fine if you're hoping that he snaps out of this funk. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope has been playing a little bit more, has been playing really solid basketball. Has at least 20 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4. Yeah, 3 of his last 4. Playing a few extra minutes. Obviously, that rotation's a little bit shortened with Rondo being out. I'm fine with KCP on FanDuel as a tournament punt. I'm fine with Josh Hart on FanDuel as a tournament punt. Fine with Hart and KCP on DraftKings. I think if you're building a bunch of lineups, I would maybe get a little bit of both. Neither projects particularly well. Josh Hart does project to be a slightly better play than KCP. He does do a little bit more. but playing again mid-20s, mid to upper 20s, so he's fine in tournaments. McGee is really, really cheap. 5,700 on DraftKings. Projects to be a pretty solid play in this spot as well. I'm fine with him. Pretty much all formats. I think I like him a little bit more on FanDuel because of the blocks. There's a lot of guys in this lineup that are taking a decent amount of shots at the rim. Chetty Osman, 40% of his shots at the rim. Colin Sexton, 34% of his shots at the rim. Larry Nance, 55% of his shots at the rim. Clarkson, 25. Tristan Thompson, 68% of his shots at the rim. That gives McGee some block upside. So I think I like him a lot in tournaments over on FanDuel, where those blocks mean a little bit more. Flipping over to the other side of this game, Colin Sexton is questionable for this game. I don't think he misses. I don't think the injury is serious. I think he's going to be someone that suits up in here, and I have a decent amount of interest in him. He's never going to project as a great option because he's just a volume shooter. But Lakers ranked 20th in defensive efficiency to point guards on the season. They're allowing him to shoot 42.7% from the floor, 39.7% from three. Colin Sexton not jacking up a ton of threes, 2 or 3 a game, but he is jacking up a ton of shots, and that's pretty appealing. So Colin Sexton at 5,400, I like him in cash. I like him in tournaments. I really like Jordan Clarkson in the spot. Obviously, a little bit of a revenge game, but 5,200 for Jordan Clarkson on DraftKings. Really, really fair price. 56 on FanDuel. I really like that price as well. Lakers struggle to defend in isolation. 17% of his possessions come in isolation. 30% of his field goal attempts are coming from three. Again, the Lakers allowing 37.3% shooting on above the break threes, and they're allowing point guards. I'll call Clarkson a point guard because he does a lot of ball handling, but they're allowing point guards to shoot almost 40% from beyond the arc. Hood is fine in tournaments. He's still playing a decent amount of minutes, but it's Rodney Hood. Chetty has been an absolute disaster recently, but at 4,300, that price is pretty darn appealing. Larry Nance Jr., it is a revenge game, so he does have a little bit of motivation. Played a decent amount of minutes last game. Got the start, played 20 minutes. I expect him to play a little bit more, especially if he's going to be back in that starting lineup. I have a decent amount of interest in Larry Nance Jr. tonight. And then Tristan Thompson is fine in cash. Very underrated spot, I think, for Tristan Thompson here. Projects to be a decent cash game value. Coming off a couple down games, we know he has monster upside. So I am fine with Tristan Thompson in cash tonight. Moving on, Phoenix, Chicago. Chicago 2-point favorites, 211.5 over under. I'm going to call this one candidate to hit the over tonight. Zach LaVine, questionable. I'm pretty sure he's going to suit up in this one. Was dealing with an injury or illness last couple games actually. Played through it one of the last 2 games, but looking at the Phoenix side of things, Devin Booker started at point guard last game. Was a pretty big success. 37 points with 8 assists in 36 minutes. 37.5% usage rate. Had 9 potential assists. I love him in all formats. Whether you look at point guards or shooting guards, whatever position you want to call them, the Bulls really suck at defense. Cash game viable, monster tournament upside. Devin Booker, a guy that I have a lot of interest in the spot. McCall Bridges, the other Bridges, got in foul trouble last game, but still started. He's not going to be a guy that gets a ton of shots, but I actually think he's fine in tournaments and cash as a very, very decent value option. Projects actually to be a solid cash game and tournament play here. Better on DraftKings at 4K than FanDuel at 4,600. He's going to get you 6, 7, 8 shots most nights. He needs to be efficient with those shots. can get you some, block steals, rebounds, things like that. If he can score in double digits and, notch a couple rebounds and stuff, he can easily pay off that 4K salary. So I like him a significant amount here. TJ Warren, going back to the well with TJ Warren, still playing a ton of minutes. TJ Warren projects to be one of the best values, I think, on the slate. Well, not really values, but one of the best mid-range options on the slate. 6,700 on DraftKings, 7K on FanDuel. TJ Warren just playing so many freaking minutes. It's really, really tough to overlook him. 39, 40, 38, 40, 37, 42 over his last 6 games since being inserted in the starting lineup. Bulls ranked 27th in defensive efficiency to power forwards on the season. Willie Hernan-Gomez ruled out. He's great in cash. Price is a little prohibitive for GPPs, but I really, really like him. Chicago giving up 1.22 points per possession in transition. That's a pretty big boost to Warren, Ariza, and Bridges. These guys really, really solid in transition on the season. Ariza 24.4% of his possessions in transition. McCall Bridges 34% of his possessions in transition. And TJ Warren 22% of his possessions are in transition. I like Ariza in cash. I like TJ Warren in cash. I like everybody in tournaments for the most part of those guys. And DeAndre Ayton, still a very, very solid tournament option. Never a guy I'm going to fall in love with, especially at center where it's really, really deep. But at 6,900 on DraftKings, 7K on FanDuel, I'm fine with that. In tournaments, flipping over, actually, I will say this: I would have some exposure to Warren, Ariza, Bridges, or Ayton if you're going to fade Devin Booker in the spot. But flipping over to the Chicago side, LaVine, definitely someone to consider if he's coming back in the spot, which I expect him to. Really, really good matchup for him. High usage guy. Phoenix allowing 1.13 points per possession in isolation. LaVine, 15% of his possessions come in isolation. Zach LaVine, 7,900 on DraftKings. Very, very, very affordable. 83 on FanDuel. I'm fine with that price. It is a pretty solid price for him there. 32.2% usage rate on the season. Just underpriced for the upside he has. He's another guy kind of like Drew Holiday where you feel pretty confident he's going to get you 40-plus fantasy points with a pretty high ceiling. So I like Zach LaVine a decent amount here. Jabari Parker has scored in double figures in 16 of his last 17 games. Usage rate is down, again, whenever he's in the starting lineup, but against a Phoenix team, again, I mentioned they struggled in isolation, 1.13 points per possession allowed. 24% of his possessions come in isolation. I like Jabari Parker and cash in tournaments. More of a, I think, cash game play at his price, 6K on DraftKings, 6,200 on FanDuel. Wendell Carter Jr. I don't know what Fred Hoiberg is doing with this guy. I feel bad for him. Just not getting a ton of minutes. Blowouts, not getting minutes. Close games, not getting a ton of minutes. It just doesn't make any sense to me. This is a good spot for him, though. Phoenix really, really, really bad against centers. They're one of the worst teams in the NBA defending centers. So I have a lot of interest in him tonight. 1 second. Go. Yeah. Where was I? Wendell Carter Jr. There we go. Good way to get exposure to this game, especially on DraftKings. 5,500, 6,900 on FanDuel. Power forward doesn't really appeal to me, but Phoenix ranks 30th in defensive efficiency to centers on the season. They're giving out 25.6 points, 16.1 rebounds, 2.3 blocks, 54.6% field goal shooting. Phoenix, 5 of their most used players taking at least 35% of their shots at the rim. Wendell Carter Jr. has some block upside in the spot. They're also giving up 53.7 points in the paint, 44.8 rebounds. All of that to say, I really, really like Wendell Carter Jr. on DraftKings. Going to be a core option for me on DraftKings. Again, on FanDuel, if you wanted to roll him out in tournaments, feel free, but 6,900, that's really not appealing there. Archie Diacono, not a lot of upside. Not really interested in him here. I would be more inclined to maybe take a shot on Shaquille Harrison. We have a revenge game for Shaq Harrison here. Not really a great price on FanDuel at 4,500. Better on DraftKings at 3,700. Harrison playing decent amount of minutes. I think he gets some run even if Zach LaVine is back. He's right now probably their best option to shut down Devin Booker or try to shut down Devin Booker. So Shaq Harrison, someone to consider in tournaments, especially on DraftKings. Moving on, Detroit, Houston. Whew. We're getting there, guys. We're getting there. Detroit, Houston. Whew. Houston, 8.5-point favorites, 215 over under in this one. Pull this game up in my projections. And let's look at Detroit's side first. Drummond comes in this game 6 straight double-doubles. Faces a Rockets team giving up 50 points per game in the paint. Their defense has gotten a little bit better of late. That happens when you take Carmelo Anthony out of the lineup. But he's fine in tournaments. Not someone I have a ton of cash game appeal with him and Griffin's price coming down. At least on DraftKings, I'm fine with him in tournaments. I'm fine with Blake Griffin in tournaments. Doesn't project to be like a monster play, but Blake Griffin, really solid cash game option, I guess. Yeah, it's really tough to love any of these guys at their current prices, but this is a really good spot for them. Houston allowing 0.95 points per possession on post-ups. That is a pretty big boost to Griffin. 30.2% of his possessions come on post-ups this season. So Griffin is where I would lean, especially if you're forcing exposure to this game. 9,200 on FanDuel, that's a much better price. Projects to be a pretty solid play on FanDuel and DraftKings. Right around 44 DraftKings points, 42 FanDuel points. So not great return on those salaries, but still decent options. So that's that. Reggie Jackson, Ish Smith, guys you can consider. But a lot of this game focuses on Griffin and Drummond for me. It's not really, I just don't like Detroit. They're just not efficient. They struggle to score. Yeah, it's really tough to like a whole lot of Detroit outside of the two guys that usually do most of the damage. But I mean, Ish Smith is 3,700 on DraftKings, 4K on FanDuel. He fits as a value punt on FanDuel. Could get you 24, 26 on DraftKings, so I guess in tournaments, that's fine. Hasn't been the guy that we expect him to be, though. Not getting you that like 1 fantasy point per minute like he used to. So, yeah, just not terribly appealing for that side of things. The Houston side, however, is pretty darn appealing, and that starts with James Harden. James Harden actually projects to be one of the better values on the slate. Let me pull up the entire projection model and give you guys another peek into that real quick. If you look, James Harden coming in projects right around 56 fantasy points on DraftKings, a little bit lower on FanDuel. Comes in at like 5.5x, 5.25x over on DraftKings. 10.9, really fair price. Really high value rating for him there, 29.8. So that's pretty solid. Let me filter out any of the riffraff. And let's sort this, largest to smallest. And let's see. That didn't work. Why is this not doing this way? Sort largest to smallest. Whatever. Excel can't sort very well, apparently. Still projects to be a pretty solid option here. Yeah, I like him a decent amount. Let's take a look at the rest of Houston here in the projection model. And, oh, that's why. I just completely messed up the projection model. We're going to come back over here to DraftKings while I fix this because everybody just got a little bit messed up here. Let's go back a couple pages. But yeah, James Harden gonna be the overlooked star in this spot here. I think looking at it, there we go. That's fixed now. That's better. James Harden again, gonna be the overlooked guy here in the spot with LeBron returning to Cleveland, Kevin Durant facing OKC. Absolutely should not be overlooked here though. Detroit really struggles against shooting guards, 24th in defensive efficiency against them, giving up 24.4 points, 6.7 rebounds, 4.7 assists, 45% field goal shooting. They do limit opposing shooting guards to just 31.9% from beyond the arc. That's a little concerning, but still. 72% of his shots come, 37% of his shots come at the rim. Opponents are shooting 72% at the rim against Detroit. I have a lot of interest in James Harden. 10-9 again on DraftKings, a little too cheap for him here. Over the past 5 games, 29.6 points per game, 37.3% usage rate. Really solid spot. Capella comes in on the heels of his second straight double-double. Very intriguing tournament option tonight. Again, Detroit allowing 72% field goal shooting at the rim. 84% of Capella's shots come at the rim. Clint Capella, a guy we saw with a pretty monster ceiling. 55.5 fantasy points against the Kings. Kings, another team that really struggled to defend at the rim. Really solid production here against Denver as well. Kind of up and down. Some of that happens to do with his minutes, but against a team with a true big man in Andre Drummond, Clint Capella should play a decent amount of minutes. I have a lot of interest in him, especially on DraftKings at 7,600. Chris Paul, fine in all formats. Detroit, again, struggling against point guards. 26.8 points, 6.9 rebounds, 8.9 assists, 47.5% field goal shooting. Chris Paul, perfectly fine in cash and tournaments. 8,300 on DraftKings, 8,700 on FanDuel. James Ennis, revenge game. James Ennis, 3,800 on FanDuel. There's one of your value plays, value punts on the game, on the slate. Gary Clark as well. Probably not on FanDuel at 4,400 for Gary Clark, but James Ennis, I think, is the guy that you're looking at there. Moving on, Portland, Milwaukee. Milwaukee, 6-point favorites, 226 over under in this game. This is a pretty appealing game, I think. We're going to start with the Portland side, and we're going to take a look and see Damian Lillard, obviously coming off a really, really big game again. Has looked really good recently. I'm fine with Lillard in pretty much all formats. He's averaging 29 points over the past 4 games, 40 points against Washington just a couple days ago. Shooting a little bit worse than I would like, 38% over his last 5 games, 28% from 3, but he's getting you the assist. He's getting to the line a ton. The biggest thing here is that we like guys that can shoot a lot of mid-range shots against Milwaukee because they're allowing opponents to shoot 44.3% in the paint, 43.1% in mid-range, 47.1% on corner threes. And if you look at CJ McCollum's shot profile, 20% of his shots come in the paint, 22% of his shots come in the mid-range, totaling about 41% of his shots coming between the rim and the three-point line. 3% of his shots come on corner threes, so that's not very appealing. But Milwaukee's still giving up a ton of three-point attempts per game, and we saw CJ McCollum absolutely torch his team last time out. David Nwaba will start ahead of Larry Nance on Wednesday. Nwaba, a good value option now. But I will fix that in the projections here in a little while. Cavs starting Sexton, Hood, Osman, Nwaba, and Thompson. I bet they use Nwaba as like a defensive guy against LeBron. That's going to be interesting. But back to McCollum here. I actually like McCollum a little bit more than Damian Lillard. Maybe we can call it chasing the last game, but McCollum actually projects to be a really solid value on both sides, DraftKings and FanDuel. DraftKings 6,400, FanDuel 6,700, right around that 35 fantasy point projection. So I like McCollum. You can play him in cash, I think, in the spot. He's been heating up, and that's really appealing here. The other people in this game, Yusuf Nurkic, perfectly fine. 13 points, 11 rebounds last night against New York, 5th straight double-double. It's fine in the spot. Doesn't like I'm not dying to get exposure to him. Like I think I like Cantor for a little bit cheaper on DraftKings. So that's that. Aminu and Turner, very, very, very solid value options. Both guys project to be right around in that 21 or 23 to 25 fantasy point mark, which is fine in cash. Not guys that I have a lot of interest in tournaments, but 4,500, 4,100, it's a fine spot for both of these guys. So I'm fine if they fit your lineups and you're dying to get some exposure to this game. Looking at the Milwaukee side of things, obviously, Giannis is Giannis. And yeah, you can Giannis if you want to. 29 points, 13 rebounds against Denver last time out. 10th double-double of the season. He's scored more than 20 points in each of his past 10 contests, averaging 25.9 points per game over the last 10. If you want to play Giannis at 11-2 on DraftKings and 11-4 on FanDuel, go for it. I think he had a bad game last time these teams faced off. Yeah, 40 points, but still, I mean, he was a rebound shy of a double-double on DraftKings, so that would have gotten right around that 45-point mark. He's fine. Again, if you want to play him, there's a ton of studs on the slate. I think you're looking at LeBron and Harden and Davis all before you're looking at Giannis. No, probably LeBron, Russ, Durant, Davis, Giannis, Harden is probably how I would rank the ownership on those guys. So yeah, Giannis going to be really low owned with all the other guys out there in the narratives and all that stuff. So Giannis perfectly fine in tournaments. Brolo has torched Nurkic historically, and that's definitely something to consider here. Let me pull up his box scores against him. Against Portland, let's call it last 4 seasons. Obviously, you know, not all these seasons were with the Bucks, but 36, 60, 38, 39, 33, 35, 33 fantasy points against Jusuf Nurkic, or against the Trailblazers themselves, over the last, 3 seasons. Let's say Nurkic. Let's call it Nurkic the last 4 seasons. Some of those games came against his brother, against Robin Lopez. But against Nurkic, the last 4 seasons, 21.5, 44, 39, 33, 35, 33. Brook Lopez, if you're chasing that, that's pretty appealing in tournaments. So I think getting some Brook Lopez in your life actually projects to be a perfectly fine option here. 5,300 on DraftKings, 5,600 on FanDuel, projects about 27 fantasy points with upside. He's fine. Definitely someone to consider. 40.5% of his possessions are spot ups. Portland allowing 1.09 points per possession on spot ups. So the rest of Milwaukee, not terribly appealing. Chris Middleton, probably the guy I have the most interest in outside of the rest of these guys. Middleton, 7K on DraftKings, 7,300 on FanDuel. Again, just the guy I think I have the most interest in. Maybe Malcolm Brogdon. Brogdon's perfectly fine. Mid-range cash option. Eric Bledsoe, if he fit your lineup, you could. But yeah, they're just not terribly appealing outside of pretty much Giannis. They're just a bunch of guys. So yeah, Middleton, like I said, probably my favorite option. Only spotting up on 10% of his possessions, but he's efficient as a spot-up shooter. So yeah, Middleton, a guy that you can get some exposure to. Looking at Denver, Minnesota. This game, very appealing. Minnesota, 2-point favorites in this one. 216 over-under. It's a little low, I think. I actually think this one might go over. Looking at the Denver side of things, Nikola Jokic, FanDuel 9,300, DraftKings 9,700. Giving you another peek into my projection model here. Nikola Jokic actually projects to be a really, really good play here. 47 DraftKings fantasy points, 46 FanDuel fantasy points. Projects to be about a 5x value on FanDuel. Comes in with a pretty solid rating across both sites. This is a good spot for him. Digging through my notes on Nikola Jokic, Minnesota allowing 42.5% shooting in the paint, 42% on corner threes. Pretty good spot for Jokic. They also rank 27th in defensive efficiency to centers, 24.9 points, 15.4 rebounds, 58.3% field goal shooting, and 51.1% from three. He's attempted at least 8 threes in 3 of the last 10 games. So that makes him really, 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 really appealing. Probably my top center option on the slates. There's a couple guys that are a little bit cheaper that I'm going to get to in the next couple games, but I think Jokic probably my top center option on the slate. The rest of this team, Jamal Murray is fine, and in tournaments never projects as a really, really good value just because he relies really, really heavily on his shot. As you can see here, Gary Harris projects to be a really, really, really good value over on DraftKings at 5,800. About 30 fantasy points. That's fine in cash. Has tournament upside, so I think he's someone that you can definitely sprinkle in some tournaments. Over on FanDuel, where he's small forward eligible, I don't have as much interest, mostly because he's 6,600. That's just not very appealing. Monte Morris. I'm going back to Monte Morris. He's still playing a ton of minutes. Popping back over to his game log real quick. If you look, obviously didn't pay off last time. But 25 minutes, 34 minutes, 29 minutes, 31 minutes, 28, 22, 26, 20, 12, 22. He's playing a ton of minutes. And this is a spot where, digging through my notes, he tends to disappoint when he's popular. But Minnesota, decent against point guards, but they do struggle to defend the pick and roll, allowing 0.97 points per possession in the pick and roll. Morris operating as the pick and roll ball handler, 41% of his possessions this season. They're allowing, again, 42.5% shooting in the paint, 42% on corner threes. Morris, 29% of his shots come in the paint, 11% of his shots are corner threes. Monte Morris is a guy I'm planting my flag on tonight. I'm going to have a lot of exposure to Monte Morris. Just, he's too cheap, 4,300 for a guy playing 26, 28, maybe 30 minutes in a game with a 216 over-under that should be somewhat fast-paced. Monte Morris, a guy I'm going to have a lot of exposure to. Juancho in tournaments is fine. Millsap is a little bit underpriced. Minnesota ranks 27th. Oh, no, that's centers, so never mind. Millsap is fine. Same price across the industry, 5,900. Both sites, perfectly fine in cash. Looking at the Minnesota side of things, no one jumps off the page in the spot. Denver, obviously a solid defense. Pulling it up right now, they have a... I didn't get that table in here for some reason. The table's not in my notes, so let's take a look at the stats here. Well, that sucks. Don't know how that happened. As you can see, I'm a little bit unorganized today. Denver, 105.3 defensive rating on the season. That's obviously makes it a little bit tough on the Timberwolves, but the Timberwolves without Jimmy Butler have been playing much better. Karl-Anthony Towns averaging 19.8 points, 16.5 rebounds, and 73 touches per game over the last few games without Jimmy Butler. Karl-Anthony Towns comes in at 8,800 on DraftKings, 10K on FanDuel. That's a hard pass on FanDuel, but on DraftKings, 8,800 projects for about 44 fantasy points. It's a really good spot for Karl-Anthony Towns. Taking a look at his game log real quick. Let us down against Portland, but, double-digit field goal attempts in a lot of these games. Still playing a ton of minutes. Double-doubles in 3 of the last 4. It's a pretty good spot for him. So, tournaments, definitely. Cash, I'm probably still leaning Jokic. outside of the rest of those guys, no one really jumps off the page for me. As far as like Wiggins, Teague, Rose, Covington, I think Rose is the guy I have the most interest in. 6,300 on DraftKings, 6,400 on FanDuel. Decent usage, decent production in games without Jimmy Butler. I'm still lumping that in there because it's still a few games removed from Jimmy Butler being traded. Projects right around 30 fantasy points. Same thing for T. Projects right around 30 fantasy points. Rose, I think he's going to take more shots. So I think he's the guy that I would pick over those two guys. Wiggins has been really solid recently. But he's always just going to be tournaments. It is promising to see that his, if you pull up his game log, actually, he's actually getting some peripherals, getting some assists, getting some rebounds. If you were playing the Andrew Wiggins drinking game, every time he got a rebound and assist, you'd probably be pretty drunk after a couple of those games. But we're not going to play the Andrew Wiggins drinking game anymore. Covington's fine in cash. Going to play a lot of minutes. Tibbs is just going to run him into the ground. What did he play last game? 37. 23 against Portland. That was a blowout, but 41 against New Orleans in his first game with the Timberwolves. So, yeah, Robert Covington, perfectly fine in cash. Let's move on. Brooklyn, Dallas. Kind of yucky. Dallas 6.5-point favorites. Brooklyn are 216.5 over under, but Karis LeVert is out. Dirk is out. Nesmith Jr. is questionable. JJ Barea is questionable. Wesley Matthews is out. Dwight Powell is questionable. The Brooklyn side of this game, it's pretty easy to break down on a nightly basis, just because it's the same guys every single night. D'Angelo Russell coming off another solid game. Has scored at least 20 points in 3 straight games, averaging 7.3 assists, 5 rebounds, and 2.7 steals in that span. Doesn't project as a monster value, coming in at about 35 fantasy points on DraftKings, 32 on FanDuel. But you know the usage is going to be there. You know the shot attempts are going to be there. The minutes are going to be there without Karis LeVert. I like D'Angelo Russell in cash and tournaments here. I think the guy that I have the most interest in is Spencer Dinwiddie. 27.7% usage rate, 1.13 fantasy points per minute without LeVert. 41% of his shots are above the break threes. 26% of his shots are mid-range shots. Looking at Dallas's defense, 44.3% shooting allowed on mid-range shots. 38.9% allowed on above the break threes. More of a cash option just because I feel pretty confident that he can get you, 28, 30 fantasy points, 5,900. I'll take that. Doesn't have a ton of upside, though, at that price tag. And on FanDuel at 6,300, still more of a cash game option for me there. The rest of Brooklyn, I mentioned above the break threes for Dallas, 38.9% allowed. Joe Harris, 41% of his field goal attempts are non-corner threes. That makes him a little bit appealing at 4,400 on DraftKings. He has 47 on FanDuel. That's still fine. Let's see the rest of these guys. Allen Crabbe, 50% of his field goal attempts are non-corner threes this season. That makes Allen Crabbe someone that I would at least have some tournament exposure to, especially on FanDuel. 4,400, it's fine. But yeah, it's not terribly appealing. Jared Allen, I think we need to talk about Jared Allen here a little bit. 3 straight double-doubles, 13 points, 14 rebounds against Miami. Has been playing really, really well. Minutes have been solid for him. We like him against true big men that aren't going to, stretch the floor. Jared Allen, 5,600. That's really, really appealing. 68 on FanDuel, not as appealing, but I still like him in tournaments there. I think he's fine in tournaments. Cash games and tournaments on DraftKings, I do like him a significant amount. But looking at the Dallas side of things, really, really hard to break this side down without Dennis Smith Jr., JJ Barea, and Dwight Powell news, unfortunately. If Barea is out, Dennis Smith Jr. becomes pretty intriguing. Nets giving up 1.06 points per possession. to the pick and roll ball handler. 40% of his possessions are in the pick and roll. If Barea is out, that boosts his minutes floor. I could comfortably project him for about 30, 31 with some upside here. So Dennis Smith Jr., a guy, would have some tournament exposure to if Barea is out. If Dennis Smith Jr. sits and Barea plays, Barea becomes a pretty interesting option. So does Jalen Brunson. If Barea and Dennis Smith Jr. are out, Jalen Brunson would become one of the better value plays on the slate. You could also look at maybe Devin Harris. But again, a lot of this news we're just going to have to react to as we get it, and I will do that in Discord for you guys. Nets are absolutely hoarding against centers, giving up 66.3 fantasy points per game to them. They rank 29th in defensive efficiency. They're getting obliterated by the roll man in the pick and roll. All signs point to DeAndre Jordan being one of the best center plays on the slate. He is a guy I have a lot of interest in. I'm probably going to pair him on DraftKings with Nikola Jokic, but projects really, really, really well in this spot. If you want to take a look over at my projection model one more time, we can see $400 price difference on FanDuel, $7,500. That's fine. Projects for about 42 fantasy points. Projects to be a really, really solid value. Has a great rating compared to everyone else. Again, you know, the Westbrooks and some of these other guys are high 20s, low 30s. Having DeAndre Jordan in that 25, 23 range, really, really, really appealing here. I like DeAndre Jordan a significant amount. Cash games, tournaments, really, really solid spot for DeAndre Jordan. Luka Doncic is fine. Projects actually to be a pretty solid play over on DraftKings at 6,800. Unfortunately, he's point guard eligible only. That kind of sucks. Dorian Finney-Smith, a guy to keep an eye on. Obviously going to play more minutes if injuries dictate it. Again, I will cover that stuff in Discord later once we get more news on that. Moving on to a game that won't take very long at all, mostly because it's pretty ugly. It's the lowest projected total on the slate. Opened at like 198. It's climbed up just a little bit to like 200. Woohoo. San Antonio, 2.5 point favorites. Davis Bertans questionable. Pau Gasol is out. Chandler Parsons is out. Dylan Brooks is out. This game is just pretty unappealing here. Looking at the Memphis side of things, Spurs do struggle to defend in the paint and are allowing opponents to shoot 46.4% in the paint. 31% of Marc Gasol's shots are coming in the paint. Marc Gasol, a fantastic cash option on DraftKings at 7,800. He's a fade for me on FanDuel at 9K. That's just not appealing. Projects right around that 40 fantasy point mark for me there. Mike Conley's fine in cash. Mike Conley's fine in tournaments. It's Mike Conley. You feel pretty comfortable. He's going to play, 36, 37 minutes, have a solid game. Never really carries a ton of upside, even though last time I said that he came out and put up like 50 fantasy points. But I feel pretty confident he's going to get me 30 plus most nights. I like Conley in cash. Spurs do struggle to defend the 3-point line. Opponents are shooting 36.5% from 3 against them. Temple actually sees a decent boost here with that being factored in because 47% of his possession or shots are from 3. Spurs also 1.35 points per possession allowed in transition. Garrett Temple, 24.7% of his possessions are in transition. Temple, very, very affordable over on DraftKings at 4,200, 4,700 on FanDuel. Not as appealing, but a fine cash option. Same with Kyle Anderson. I hate Kyle Anderson, but at 4,500 on DraftKings, very appealing in cash. 5,800 on FanDuel. That's a hard pass. Looking at the rest of the guys in my projections, JaMychal Green, still really cheap. Only played like 15 minutes last game, but he's putting up solid numbers over the last couple of games. He's fine in tournaments at 4,100. Shelvin Mack, again, continues to play a decent amount of minutes. 4K. Only played 18 last game, but I expect him to get back up in that mid-20s, so he's fine. And that covers that side of the game. Let's look at San Antonio, where it's really, really just, yeah, it's, yeah. Yeah. Nobody projects to be a very good option in this game. DeRozan, Aldridge are usage plays. Rudy Gay is fine in cash, projects to get you mid 20s and fantasy points. That's about it. Yeah, it's just not a very appealing game. That's one that I'm very, very comfortable skipping. So, moving on to a game that I do have more interest in. We're hitting the home stretch, boys. Last two games of the night. Sacramento at Utah. Utah, 9.5-point favorites, 220 over under. I think this game stays closer than Vegas does. And looking at the Sacramento side, this doesn't look like a great spot for the Kings, but I think it is. And I have a lot of interest in a lot of people from this game, actually. De'Aaron Fox was super chalk last game at 6,100. Let everybody down. Shot like shit. 1 of 10 from the floor. Still 13 assists. Still put up 27 fantasy points despite going 1 of 10 from the floor. Yeah, De'Aaron Fox, a guy I'm going back to the well on De'Aaron Fox. I love him in this spot. Torched the Jazz, actually, last time they played. That's not De'Aaron Fox. That's Donovan Mitchell. 41 fantasy points, 21 points, 7 assists, 4 rebounds, 8 of 16 from the floor. He's playing a ton of minutes, and that's really appealing. It's really, really, really appealing. De'Aaron Fox actually projects to be a really, really, really solid value over on DraftKings. 5.6x value. 4.64 on FanDuel because he's 7,500. It's not as appealing, but Utah does struggle against guys that can operate in the pick and roll, get some open shots in the mid-range, get to the rim. 67% of his shots come at the mid-range or come at the rim or in the mid-range. De'Aaron Fox, a core option for me on DraftKings. More of a tournament play on FanDuel. But yeah, Utah allowing 1.04 points per possession on post-ups. They're also kind of bad against centers. Willie Cauley-Stein, 17% of his possessions are post-ups this season. He projects to be a really solid value on DraftKings at 5,700. FanDuel, 7,100. I would say tournaments only. Let me pull up how Utah is doing against centers now, because for a while they were really bad against centers, and I think they still are. 17th in defensive efficiency against centers. That's pretty interesting. But yeah, so Willie Cauley-Stein on DraftKings, fantastic tournament option. Buddy Hield, fine in all formats, still shooting pretty well. Marvin Bagley, a fantastic tournament option on DraftKings. Fade on FanDuel, where he's 5,700. Nemanja Bjelica, a guy that I have interest in tournaments on both DraftKings and FanDuel. Doesn't project to be a solid value. Coming off a decent game. Minutes are trending downwards just because they have more bodies. But if he's hot and he's playing really well, I think Jaeger is going to stick with him. So I'm fine with Bjelica in tournaments here. Bogdanovic, a guy I have a lot of interest in cash, especially on DraftKings at 4,100. Projects right around that 20 fantasy point mark. I think he can get you over that. Going to play probably 25, 26 minutes. Double-digit field goal attempts in every game since returning. I lied. These last two, or the first two, weren't. But the last 4 double-digit field goal attempts, 20-plus fantasy points. Pretty confident he can get you there. So, yeah, he's fine in cash and tournaments on both sites, actually. 4,600 on FanDuel, 4,100 on DraftKings. So, pretty fair price. Flipping over to the Utah side of things, let me swap to that in my projections, and we can take a look, see who pops out here. Oh boy, my guy Rudy Gobert. I was all over Gobert last game, kind of let me down, but this is a spot where I am going back to the well. And if you take a look over in my projection model, Rudy Gobert, 38 fantasy points, 40 on FanDuel, where the blocks count a little bit more. Fantastic option in all formats. Comes in with a pretty solid 19 rating on DraftKings, 21 on FanDuel. I like Rudy Gobert. Unfortunately, I like about 24 centers on this slate, so it's going to be hard to get him in. But last time these teams faced off, Rudy Gobert actually put up 44 fantasy points in 37 minutes, had a 19 and 15 game. Didn't have any blocks? Oh, 3 blocks in that game. So it's a fine spot for Rudy Gobert. So I have a decent amount of interest in him. Looking at the rest of my projections for this Utah team, Donovan Mitchell projects to be a pretty solid cash game value. I'm fine with him in all formats. A little bit better price on DraftKings. Rubio, he's been playing a little bit better of late, but I'm not really that intrigued with him here. It's just Rubio. I'd rather go like De'Aaron Fox on the flip side. So that's fine. Joe Ingles in cash is fine. Derek Favors projects to be a really solid value on DraftKings, just a decent value over on FanDuel, where he's 5,600. Derek Favors, if you look over at his game log, it's basically a lot of just mediocre games. 17 against the Pacers, but 25, 24, 18 against Dallas, 32, 23, 30. I like him. He's fine. The rest of these guys, Jay Crowder, perfectly fine in cash as well. Dante Exum, a interesting value option on FanDuel. Last game of the night, and then we are getting out of here. OKC, Golden State, 222.5 over under. OKC, 1 point underdogs in this one. Jeremy Grant is questionable. Alex Abrinas is questionable. Nerlens Noel, questionable. Terrence Ferguson, out. Draymond Green, out. Alfonso McKinney, out. Stephen Curry, out. Paul George back down in price. He's very appealing in the spot against Golden State. If you take a look, I feel pretty confident most nights he's going to get you 40-plus fantasy points with Russell Westbrook back in the lineup. 8,900 on DraftKings. That's a pretty appealing price. I like Paul George a decent amount on DraftKings because people just aren't going to go there. He's going to be very overlooked in this spot. So in tournaments, I like Paul George. 8,900 on FanDuel. That's still a very appealing price. He projects to be a pretty solid option here. Russell Westbrook, obviously a really, 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 really good play. 10-7 on DraftKings. 11K on FanDuel. Projects right around that 56, 58 fantasy point mark. One of the better ratings on the slate here. Golden State allowing 67.2% shooting at the rim. 54% of Russ's shots come at the rim. Without Draymond being there, that definitely helps Russell Westbrook. And obviously there is, a little bit of narrative here, Russ hating the Warriors and Kevin Durant. So, yeah, this is going to be a fun game to watch. It might be a little bit heated, but yeah, I like Adams perfectly fine in all formats. Minutes going to probably climb a little bit if Nerlens Noel misses. And then Grant is fine if he plays. He's a guy that I like a lot as just a cash game, mid-range guy. And then if you're looking on FanDuel, Hamidou Diallo and Alex Abrinas, 2 guys that you can use to get some exposure here. If Noel plays, you can use him on FanDuel. If you're punting center, I wouldn't recommend punting center, but if for some reason you're feeling frisky, you can. On to Golden State. We know Kevin Durant monster usage without Draymond and Curry. 40.5% usage rate, 1.49 fantasy points per minute without Draymond Curry on the floor. Kevin Durant, 10-6, revenge game, narrative street. If you want to play him, play him. I like Westbrook for pretty much the same price on FanDuel. And what is he over on DraftKings? Or on DraftKings, I like Westbrook for pretty much the same price. And on FanDuel, I like him for pretty close to the same price. He projects to be a solid value. I mean, right around 48 fantasy points. Probably gets you a little bit more than that, but that's fine. Clay is a fantastic tournament option here. Okay, so you've been getting torched a little bit by some of these guys that can spot up. Has a really solid usage rate, 33.1% usage rate without Curry and without Draymond on the floor. Perfectly fine. Looney stands out to be one of the better value options, I think, for me in this spot. We saw him actually put up a really solid game against Oklahoma City when these teams opened the season. Without Draymond, I think he is one of the better options that OKC can use, or that Golden State can use against Steven Adams. So Kevon Looney, a guy that I would probably be getting some exposure to on DraftKings and tournaments. Quinn Cook is perfectly fine, 22.8% usage rate without Curry and Draymond. He's fine in tournaments, and that would be about all I would use him in. Whew. That's the entire slate. Lots to talk about. Gonna be a hectic day. Good luck in all your contests tonight. I hope everyone has a wonderful Thanksgiving, and I will be back on Friday with a 12-game slate.